This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome to Reasonable Doubt. More importantly, what color belt?
He went from yellow with a white stripe to yellow with a black stripe.
What's the next step?
I think next up is purple, but I'm not certain about that. There may be one more stripe there. These places understand that you have to buy the new belt every time. So they've found a clever way to make sure that there's several iterations between each actual color change. So, how
much does a belt cost, by the way?
You know what? I couldn't tell you for certain, but I think that it's somewhere in the $40 or $50 range. And, that comes with the promotion ceremony and all of that. So
how much does a dozen eggs cost?
I mean, at Costco, you can get them for a ridiculously reasonable price, but I believe a dozen eggs at the local grocery store is somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 or $11.
Yeah.
I will say, though, the Costco egg thing is the bane of my existence because I tried to go this weekend right when they opened thinking I would beat the rush. And now they have a designated egg line that you have to enter on. And they've sectioned off every single aisle so that there's a pallet at the end of it. So you can't go down an aisle and turn and go down the next aisle. You have to U-turn every aisle and do the whole thing. It's a nightmare.
What are the benefits of being a vegan for Lent, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's 40 days egg free.
Yeah, that's a big help and a good way to save money these days.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about this week, and I didn't tell you, we haven't, so that people know, we normally do a lot of preparation. This week, a little less.
Yeah, egg-shaped preparation.
Huh?
Egg-shaped.
Okay, yes, an egg. But last night, I don't know if you could find it. I don't know if I texted it to you, but the Department of Justice filed a brief in support of the dismissal of the case against Eric Adams. And it's an interesting Rorschach test for me, at least. And I'll tell you, if you don't have it, Gary, I'll text it to you and you can lay it in so that there's a link to it. But if you actually read it, it's a very persuasive, savage takedown of what was going on in the prosecution of Eric Adams.
Here's a section that I found while you were speaking in real time. I do not know if this is what you want or if it's even pertinent, but this was the first kind of image that came up when I put in the right keywords.
Yeah. However, if the court elects to expand the record supporting the motion, which it should not do, the record reflects additional troubling conduct at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. On February 12th, so less than a month ago, the recently resigned acting U.S. attorney sent herself a draft letter stating she was personally disappointed in her predecessor's self-serving actions after his departure. I assume that that's Miss Sassoon talking about Damian Williams. And for those who aren't in the weeds.
That is correct. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the tweet that I pulled this picture from, and that is exactly who it is. Sassoon is expressing your concerns about Damian Williams.
Yeah. And we talked about this in real time. Mind you, Eric Adams' indictment was premised on the getting upgrades from Turkish Airlines and businessman number 3, who I believe that I've had overlap with in other cases. I'll leave it at that. But Turkish co-opting of American politicians is something I've spent 30 years off and on fighting against. So I say that as I suppose, full disclosure that what I'm about to say in the Eric Adams case, it gives me some credibility in terms of my opinion that this was one of the most, this and also I would say Diddy, two of the most ill-conceived prosecutions. And the timing of both of them, I thought, was incredible. And that's part of what the motion is. But going back to my point about the Rorschach test, if you're a criminal defense lawyer or have practiced criminal defense, you've waited for whatever number of years, you have waited for the Department of Justice at the highest levels, emanating out of Washington, D.C., to take the stands that they are taking now about weaponization. Long before, or years before Trump was elected the first time around, I was talking about, with Adam in the inception of this case, the weaponization of the criminal law in terms of political cases. And I owe my career to one of the first waves of that during Whitewater, and predicting that these kinds of things would just swing, and the pendulum, every time the pendulum swung, the proverbial shoe would be on the other foot. So you read Emile Beauvais' motion in support, and it's breathtaking, and it just calls it all out. And Gary, hopefully put a link to it, and I'll send it to you.
I have it. No, I have the link.
It is worth, if you're a lawyer, if you're not a lawyer, it is worth a read. I will tell you, it is absolutely worth a read. I think the status of that case is that Judge Ho, who's in the Southern District, has appointed Paul Clement to give him, who's a very well thought of former Solicitor General, to weigh in on the case, and which ought to be interesting. But it's a fascinating, to me, legally, the whole idea of a judge having to make a decision about, in the face of the Department of Justice saying, we do not want to proceed with this prosecution. And obviously, if the underlings had not resigned, we wouldn't be where we are. But the very public way that they resigned, and from the Department of Justice higher echelons, the insubordinate way that they resigned, has caused this kerfuffle, if you will. And as far as the Rorschach test, I sent that Emile Beauvais authored motion around to various criminal defense lawyers that I know, some cases who have worked with me for 10 years or for me in some context. And the reactions are just, that's the Rorschach test. I mean, there are defense lawyers who can't get out of their ideological silo long enough to actually read dispassionately what is going on. That's troubling to me.
Yeah, it really is. And you had told me that a lot of the people that you had sent it to you got there because they sent you texts outraged as to what was happening, and only for you to learn that they hadn't in fact read the letter. And then when they did, I would imagine many of them, changed their tune.
I don't know. I get tagged with, oh, you've fallen in love with the fearless leader. No, I read what was said, and I don't understand if you're a defense lawyer. And mind you, part of what the idea conceptually, theoretically, of being a lawyer is that you take an oath to zealously defend your clients. Then downstream from that is this idea that you understand the difference between a prosecutor and a defense lawyer's obligation. A defense lawyer, as I said, zealously advocate. That's not what a prosecutor is supposed to do. Prosecutor is supposed to strike hard blows, but supposed to seek truth, is not supposed to, for agenda one or job one is not the conviction. Job one is to seek truth. That is not the defense lawyer's.
Yeah,
not his mantra.
Right. You're starting from two different points. The prosecutor is supposed to wield his power, with a level of fairness in mind, whereas a defense attorney comes in kind of already behind the eight ball of this client is being prosecuted and is being charged, and you have to come at it from a different standard because you don't wield the same power.
Exactly. And you don't have all of the advantages. And I love when they talk about a high-priced defense lawyer, or he's, a hotshot or high-powered. No matter what you say, the prosecution almost always, 99.9% of the time, the prosecution has unlimited resources to prosecute and to bring the power of the government down on your head. So the whole idea is they're supposed to judiciously exercise that awesome power. And they're not supposed to do it for ulterior motives. And the public would tell you at certain points, you've got to make choices. You've got to kind of triage what you think is important to spend your money on, and what jobs justice are supposed to go after. But I will tell you that this whole fight that has been unfolding in the Southern District is just absolutely fascinating, and just a microcosm of what is happening in the Department of Justice right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I will once again link that letter in the YouTube description. So youtube.com/reasonable doubt podcast. You click on the description below the video. There'll be a link to Emile Beauvais' letter right there.
And now another friend, she has been a friend of the show, friend of mine, testified. Maybe you've got this. I'm just freewheeling here. So Gary will get the comments today about his eyes and that serial
comes with
killer.
the territory.
Right. But Harmeet has testified. I believe I saw some clips of it that were tweeted at me, and was as usual, remarkable. And I hope you can find one of those clips and play it. She has been nominated and for the head of civil rights. Yeah, I heard the voice.
Yep. Let me rip it here, and we'll play it in just a second. Go ahead and vamp for me for just 1 second.
So her appointment, which requires Senate approval, is for the head of civil rights, which what a perfect.
I was so happy when I saw that nomination. I mean, she is just the absolute right person for a job like that. And she's, you said a friend of the show and a friend of yours. I would like to presume to call her a friend of mine. She's just a great person, and I think that she will do absolutely killer in that job. It's
it's the only downside to all of this is she lost her husband and her dad in a very short period of time, both of them, and they may not be here to share it with her, but I'm sure they're looking from someplace and sharing it with her. She's just, here we go, play it along.
I can think of no higher honor as a lawyer than to be charged with defending and advancing the civil rights of all American citizens. My entire career in 32 years has included religious liberty litigation on the side of people of faith, of minority and majority faiths, and I've won cases at the United States Supreme Court defending people of faith from government tyranny and obstruction.
She leads with integrity, fearlessness, and an unshakable belief in the rule of law and the importance of sticking with the Constitution.
Young girls and women are seeing their dreams of hard-fought equal access to sports opportunities, of even basic privacy, modesty, and dignity in women's private spaces, being sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. The Department of Justice stands for justice for all Americans.
Harmeet is a fearless, longtime defender of constitutional rights.
So that's a supercut that I was, trying to pull in real time, but I think that it shows an illustration of kind of what her testimony looked like.
Yeah, there were a couple of senators from the Democratic side of the aisle who I think she owned. Isn't that the term?
Yes, that is the term the kids use.
She owned, and she did it in her own way, which is just, I brought the receipts. I think somebody said, you've lost this COVID case, or you lost that COVID case. Well, actually, I won at the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately is where it counts. Talk about Pyrrhic victories for the other side on the way up. So kudos to her. I can hardly wait for the Senate to vote. It should be by acclamation. She deserves it. She's a very able lawyer and a wonderful woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not be happier for her. And I hope that it's a quick confirmation and she can get to work, because she would be a absolutely great advocate for people in our country.
Yeah, and would bring, boy, what a different perspective. You know, I was thinking about the fact that the civil rights DOJ never brought any action in connection with Daniel Shaver. And if there was ever a case where that was designed.
For listeners who maybe go in and out, Daniel Shaver is the case that we've covered ad nauseum out in Mesa, Arizona, correct?
Yeah. Which was one of my proudest moments, handling that case, representing Lady Sweet and her beautiful daughters. And I still text and keep in touch with them, resolved it, I think, for the largest settlement in Arizona history, not before they came at me personally.
Yeah.
When I say they, Mesa did, tried to get, somebody had written an article somewhere, which I said they were talking about some of the attacks that we were getting. And it was like, really? That's the takeaway, that you're going to buy into the nonsense that because I helped a client who was having a mental health crisis at the time, and they used that to try to concoct ethical violations. That's where we come in America. More power to you. I'm proudly wear that.
Pretty unfortunate that you hurt them in the pocketbook after they execute a citizen and they decide to come after you on a technicality.
Yeah, and that's fine. You know, be careful what you wish for, and be careful who you strike at.
Yep, absolutely. And for listeners who have been following along every week, we celebrated her wedding not too long ago, just a few episodes back, if I remember correctly. Yep,
it's right around the new year, and I remember it, think of it fondly, and it just reminded me Harmony's taken over that section, and that civil rights at the DOJ never pursued that case, and they should have. It was a case that should have been pursued. It was a case that righteously should have been pursued for reasons that I won't even get into right now.
Yep, absolutely. And long time listeners, I would say one of maybe Adam's best rants of the past decade he did on that topic. I mean, it was this is a case we followed for a long time and has inspired some really great podcasting, I would say.
Yeah. Also, I think he did a chapter in his book on it. So on the case itself, it's so one of the cases where I use Adam as my as the screener for what cases I want to take or not take.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, anything else you want to touch on? I know there were a couple more.
There are, but I think I'll wait because there's going to be news this week, and we'll circle back. I know that they'll say, what about a midweek? But I think that we do have a midweek. I did a Two Angry Men with Joe Tacopina.
I was going to plug that before we got out of here.
Yeah, I think that counts as a midweek, right, Gary?
It could. I did like the YouTube comment from this past episode. If you want one of those, it says at Fly Bizwag said Mark's quote, "See a midweek" comment at the end is an equivalent of a sack tap on GPS. And if we want to go with one that's not negative, I also like Terry Lawrence 001 that said nothing is hotter than a smart, independent woman, in reference to our guest host AK last week. So
that definitely that gets swag.
Yeah, I think they both do, because even if it's at my expense, that's funny. I've always said, there are multiple ways to get swag, and I'm not,
snark. Good snark.
It's funny. It's funny. I don't care if it's at my expense.
I'm going to tell you right now, the serial killer eyes, unless you can weave it into a Kim Carnes song or something, it's not going to win swag. But who knows? I don't want to shut down that line of inquiry.
Well, you've only said it twice this episode, so I'm sure no one will think to comment it this week.
Love it. Thank you, Gary. Great to see you.
Thanks, Mark. Great to see you as well. And we will see you all sometime in the future, probably next week, but we'll see you when we see you.
Midweek or Two Angry Men will drop. You got it.
Fair enough. All right. Bye-bye, Mark.
Bye-bye, Gary.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.